Today we're going to be talking about the tissues that we find in plants. And much like the tissue that we find in our own bodies, it's very similar. A tissue is simply a group of cells that have a common structure, common function, or more likely the structure and function are the same, right? So if we look at our heart, we have cardiac cells that make up cardiac tissue. That cardiac tissue is going to help provide the necessary parts to make up our cardiovascular system. And the same can be said for plants. It has specific types of tissue that we see, whether it's in the plant itself, in the roots, in the stems, in the leaves. All of these different parts of the plants are made up of 3 distinct tissue systems. Those tissue systems are the dermal, the ground, and the vascular tissue. These are continuous throughout in the entire plant, and they all have different arrangements within each organ. So we're going to start by looking at the dermal tissue, because the dermal tissue makes up a big majority of the plant that we see, and also it's the parts of the plant that we're most familiar with. Okay, so the dermal tissue is going to cover the plant like skin does in our own bodies. Okay. This covering is going to help provide protection against infection and physical damage. Plants can get infections too. There's lots of bacteria out there that could make a home inside plants, so having a good layer of protection, just like we have a good layer of protection on our skin, which protects us from would-be invaders that would like to get into our bodies and make a home there. So they have this protection. It's also going to protect them from physical damage. If something falls or if an animal, strikes the plant, that outer layer is going to protect what's going on inside the plant, right? We want to protect the machinery and all of the things that are happening inside of the plant, inside wherever it is, whether it's the stem or the leaves or wherever. So this dermal layer consists of a single layer of cells, which is called the epidermis. Again, very similar to what we see in our own bodies. And that is covered by a thick, waxy coat, which is called the cuticle. The cuticle plays a really important role in preventing water loss. Plants are dependent on their ability to contain water. It's what allows a plant to remain upright without the presence of bones or any of those types of solid structures. So water is incredibly important, so we can't be losing it. So the cuticle ensures that the plants keep all the water that they need. Most of the epidermal cells lack chloroplast, and that's because they're the outermost layer of the plant, and again, they're not going to be photosynthesizing, so if they're not photosynthesizing, they don't need to have a chloroplast. One of the types of cells that we find in this epidermal tissue are guard cells. Now, guard cells are unique in the fact that they do contain chloroplast. They are also going to regulate gas exchange between the inside of the leaf and the surrounding air, which is going to allow that air through the stomata to get in and out of the leaf. We also have epidermal hairs. These are also going to assist in lowering water loss by decreasing the flow of air over the plant surface. So as air moves over the surface, that can dry it out. These hairs basically allow the air to not touch the surface, and so it doesn't dry it out. It slows the process of water being lost from the plant. Glandular hairs are also found in the dermal tissue. They are going to prevent herbivory by storing substances that are harmful to insects. So when insects try to eat plants, if plants produce some type of toxin or some type of sticky substance or some type of substance that doesn't taste good, the glandular hairs are going to be the ones that are responsible for that. We also have root hairs, which increase water uptake by increasing the surface area of the cell. So just like we add cilia to our small intestine to increase the surface area there, these root hairs are going to increase the surface area and allow the plant to take in more water. In older stems and roots, the epidermis may be replaced by the periderm. This provides protection while permitting gas exchange. So it allows the gas exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide to take place there. The outer layer of the periderm, which is called cork tissue, is composed of dead cells whose cell walls are impregnated with a waxy material called sebarin. Okay? And so, again, preventing water loss, protecting the plant. We also have dermal tissue that we find in the root. This is going to help take up water. It's going to help dissolve minerals that we take in from the soil. The cells project outward as long, thin root hairs that then reach into the soil. So if you've ever dug up a plant and looked at those roots, the root may be very solid and very big structure, and then extending away from that, they kind of get smaller and smaller. Those are those root hairs that you're seeing that are extending to increase the amount of water and nutrients that a plant can take in. The stem itself has some simple epidermis and cuticle that eventually gets sloughed off as the plant grows. So as the plant grows, these cells are going to just basically have to move because the plant's going to be getting bigger and expanding. The leaves themselves, they have a tough epidermis on top of them and on the bottom, and they also have a thick cuticle, again, preventing water loss, and they have those small openings there, which are called stomata, which are going to let the gases move in because most of our gas exchange is going to be taking place there in the leaves. So that's pretty much all the places where we find that dermal tissue. The next group of tissue is the ground tissue. This is going to make and store food and help support the plant. There are a lot of cells that make up this tissue, and so we're going to look at the major players that are involved in here. The first one is the parenchyma. The parenchyma cells have a thin cell wall and large central vacuole. And in the leaves, they contain a lot of chloroplast. They make up the majority of the plant and perform the metabolic functions of it. So metabolic functions, we're talking about, once we've created the foods during the process of photosynthesis, then we have to go through cellular respiration to break it down. That's the metabolism we're talking about, right? Is breaking down that food, breaking down that glucose and supplying the energy that we need. Another one is the parenchyma cell. They have strong cell walls that can bend and give support to the plant. Again, this helps a plant stay upright. It helps it survive windstorms, just standing upright. Because again, we don't have the same type of skeleton we find in our bodies. Plants have no skeleton, so they're relying on cells like this. Another type of ground tissue cells that we find are the sclerenchyma. Sclerenchyma cells have a hard, thick cell wall and make cells strong and tough like the seed coats. Okay, so we want the seed coat to be surrounded by something that's durable so it can withstand going through the process of becoming a new plant. Ground tissue and roots are located in the cortex. Water and minerals are going to move through this to the vascular structures or the vascular tissues. The cortex also stores the products of photosynthesis as starches. So those high energy sugars and starches that we create during photosynthesis are going to be stored in this cortex. This is how we get potatoes and other starchy vegetables, because when we harvest potatoes and things like that, the starch, that excess starch that they didn't use for their normal functions, it gets stored. So when you eat a starchy food, you're getting that leftover carbohydrate that was stored in the plant. So again, you're going to get a lot of starch from potatoes, also breads, because again, the grains are going to be storing their excess starch. And so when you harvest those are starchy foods. Also pasta, because we're using grains to create the pasta. So all of those are really high in starch. Ground tissue in the stem is much smaller and surrounds the small bundles of vascular tissue. So in the center of the stem is called the pith. That's just a structure that we find there. In the leaves, ground tissue is called the mesophyll. The cells are in layers where they're tightly packed together to absorb sunlight, and then they're lightly packed so that oxygen and carbon dioxide can move freely between them. So we have two different setups inside the leaves there. And that brings us to our last group of tissue, the vascular tissue. The vascular tissue is a very important role because it's going to support the plant body, but it's also responsible for all of the transportation of water and nutrients that we see in the plants. In the root, the vascular tissue are together in the center, and they are surrounded by the cortex. In the stem, the vascular bundles are located sporadically around the edges, but not in a continuous ring. And then in the leaves, they appear as the veins that run in between the mesophylls. So when you look at a leaf and maybe hold it up to the light and see all of the veins there, again, that's allowing that water that's coming up from the root system and the nutrients that's coming up from the soil to get to the leaves, because again, the leaves are going to be doing the majority of the work in terms of photosynthesis. And so those are the three types of structures that we see. We have our vascular tissue, which is responsible for transport within the cell. We have our ground tissue, which is responsible for helping the plant stay upright and supporting the tissue and supplying food. And then we have our dermal tissue, which basically acts as a covering to help protect the plant. I'll see you next time.